Good evening, and welcome to Nitzutzos, Sparks on the Parsha, short tidbits, different aspects of the weekly Torah portion, which is Ekev. Ekev comes on the heels of Vaschana, the last week's portion, and the word Ekev in fact does mean heel. The entire verse, the opening verse, this is chapter 7, verse 12, reads, in this translation, "This shall be the reward when you hearken to these ordinances, and you observe and perform them." And then he goes on to list the things that God would do for us. But the English, this is one of the problems with translation, the English totally omits a word about which hundreds, if not thousands of pages have been written. The word Ekev, if I translate this now literally, it's V'haya, it shall come to pass. Ekev, the simplest translation is because of. Tishmu'un, you will hearken, you will listen to these commandments, guard them and keep them, so on and so forth. So the key word over here, Ekev, which is the name of the Parsha, has several meanings, and they're all interrelated. One meaning is, when you say one thing is the Ekev of the other, it means one thing is because of the other. Just like a heel is the bottom of the person's anatomy upon which everything else is structured. So when you say one thing causes another thing, you call it Ekev. But also Ekev means heel. It also means the end. And this is another way of translating it. It'll come to pass, and in the end, you will keep all the commandments. That God is not just telling us, if you do it, this will happen, but this is what you're going to do, so why put it off? If you can do it today, you're going to have to do it anyhow, so why postpone it? Another nuance over here, Ekev refers to a period in history. Just like Ekev could be the end of the body, the bottom part of the person's body, Ekev could also be the end of history, of this phase of history, which is what is called in the Torah Achris Hayamim, the end of days, the Messianic age. And this is again how it will be translated, and will come to pass that Ekev in the end, in the heel of history, the end of history, you will all listen to these commandments. So we have several translations. It could mean because of, it can mean in the end, or the end of days. It also has a fourth meaning that Rashi says, that there are certain commandments that are called heel commandments. Why heel commandments? Because people trample on them with their heels, because they don't consider them to be important. They're trivial in the minds of the people. And those are the things that get cast away. People neglect them because, it's not important. They'll do the important ones, but not the unimportant ones. And Rashi says that if you will observe those very trivial commandments that people trample upon with their heels, then God will keep all of his promises and give you all the rewards that he promised. So that's another interpretation. Yet, a fifth one. The word Ekev, as we said before, means heel, but it also implies, in terms of our emotions, what we do without understanding, without even feeling, just because we have accepted the responsibility based on God's authority. It's called in Hebrew Kabbalas Ol, accepting of the yoke. So when we observe the mitzvahs, the commandments, we can do it with understanding, which is great. We can do it with emotions, which is wonderful. But the truth is that what is really the test of our loyalty, of our commitment, it's when we do it with the Ekev, the bottom rung, that we're capable of accepting a higher authority. That's not enough. We have to, of course, look for the emotions, look for the understanding, but that has to be the foundation. And this is discussed in so many other occasions, that if a person bases his or her Judaism on their understanding of it, ultimately their understanding may change, and then they drop what it is. And it's not only the ritual commandments, but the man-to-man commandments, because ultimately a person who doesn't accept God's authority will feel free to harm other people as well. There's a certain dynamic that people say, well, I don't want to be restricted by the Torah. It tells me I can't do this on Shabbos, I can't eat this, I can't do this thing, can't do that thing, I have to dress a certain way. And these people feel they want to be free, and they reject the man-to-God commandments. Then there's always a likelihood, more than a likelihood, a very high probability, that they will eventually throw away the man-to-man, the social commandments. Why do I have to go out of my way to help someone else? My interests come first. Why do I have to be so conscientious and not steal and not cheat when I have to support my family and that person is a horrible person anyhow? You can make all these arguments. Now someone's going to say to me, but I know religious people who steal, says they steal in spite of their religiosity, in spite of what they've been taught. When a person who doesn't have acceptance of a higher authority steals, it's not in spite of his lack of religiosity, it's not in spite of his atheism or agnosticism, but it's rather because of it. People who are non-believers, who are good people, and there are many of them, are good in spite of their atheism, because they have it in them innately. They got it from their parents and their grandparents, and from people ultimately who were believers. So my point over here is that Parsha Ekev, when you have this acceptance of the authority, you're at the heel level, and then it goes on to talk about mishpatim. Those are the rational commandments. And even the rational commandments, you do it with Ekev, with a heel, then God will protect you and give you all the things that he promised to give you, because then he knows that you're solid. Okay, so that covers with the word Ekev. But before the word Ekev, there's another word. That the word is V'haya, which is not even in the title of the weekly portion. We don't call it V'haya, even though it's the first word. We call it Ekev. Because V'haya is not a very exciting word. V'haya, and it will come to pass. But the truth is, V'haya is also a significant word. The Midrash says that whenever the Torah uses the phrase V'haya, it's an expression of joy. One of the explanations for that is the word Haya itself means was, past tense. You put the Vav in front of it, V'haya, it transforms it into future, and it will come to pass. Anytime you can take your obsession with the past, you can really commiserate over the past, and you turn that into optimism for the future, you're a happy person. So the Torah starts with V'haya, and when you will do the commandments with joy, even the Ekev commandments, even the ones that are not rational, even the ones that are not exciting, but because you accepted a higher authority, ultimately that will bring joy. Why? Because when a person bases everything they do on their limited understanding, their limited emotions, after a while, their joy, their happiness dissipates. The more you do something, you keep on repeating it over and over again, the less exciting it becomes. But if you have this relationship with God, that you're connected to him all the time, God is the source of joy, and therefore your joy will be complete. Another Hasidic interpretation about the connection between V'haya, which is joy, and Ekev. Ekev is the heel, but it also, in emotional terms, it's understood to refer to someone who is humble, someone who is lowly, who doesn't think of himself as being better than everyone else. That person is V'haya, is a happy person. Arrogant people are not happy. Why? Because arrogant people feel the world owes them everything, and since the world is not paying their debts to this arrogant person, the person is always upset. How come they haven't paid me? How come they haven't shown me the honor I really deserve? How come they're not giving me what I want? And in every relationship, the arrogant person will never feel satisfied, will always demand more, will always be needy, and that person is never going to be happy, or will have to find ways of drowning out their depression. On the other hand, a person who is humble is a person who thinks and feels the truth, that everything that he or she has is a gift from God, that person will naturally gravitate towards joy, will always be happy, thinking that everything that he has is another gift. Every day it's another gift. Okay, so that's how the Torah begins, that God promises all the blessings, including getting rid of all illness, getting rid of all the negative things in a person's life and only positive things. Okay, then the Torah portion goes on about how you're going to come into this new land, and you should remember all the miracles, don't forget, and then how God is going to help you in taking over and conquering the land, don't fear them. One of these statements, don't fear them, appears several times in the Torah in different contexts, but it's a basic commandment that when you go out to fight a war, you're not allowed to show fear. Of course, there's a natural fear that a person will have, but to do anything by saying words, oh, I'm so scared, what am I going to do, how am I going to survive, anything that will undermine the morale of the army is a commandment in the Torah that we're not allowed to do. Maimonides actually considers it one of the 613 commandments. Others say that it's not really a commandment, it's just a statement of fact, it's a blessing. You will not fear them. You will not, it won't happen as a blessing, but it's not necessarily a commandment. But Maimonides does consider it to be a commandment. Then Moses is recounting, as he's doing throughout the entire book of Deuteronomy, he's recounting the events of the past. And in chapter 8, he admonishes us to keep all the commandments. He's admonishing the Jews who lived through the sojourn in the desert. And then he tells them in chapter 8, verse 3, Vaya'ancha vayirivecha, he afflicted you and let you hunger. Then he fed you the manna that you did not know, nor did your forefathers know. What does that mean that he afflicted us? The simple meaning is that we were hungry, and then he fed us. If we had fed us immediately, then we would never appreciate what we got. But there's an interesting midrash that says, from this verse we derive that you're supposed to light candles before the Sabbath. How does this verse relate to lighting candles before the Sabbath? So there's a very beautiful explanation based on a passage in the Talmud, that when it says that he afflicted you, what does that mean when it talks about manna? Manna is good food. In fact, it says that you were able to taste whatever food you wanted to taste. If you liked steak, you would taste the taste of a steak. If you liked cheeseburger, you would have the taste of a cheeseburger. Well, that's actually a question. But any food that you craved, you have that taste. But nevertheless, the Talmud says people were not satisfied. Why? Because they couldn't see it. If someone gives you a piece of tofu, if you're a steak eater, and they give you a piece of tofu, and it tastes exactly like steak, but it looks like tofu, most people will not be satisfied. Because the human brain works, when it comes to taste, you need vision as well, you need sight as well. And that's why a person who cannot see the food will not appreciate it and enjoy it as much as the one who could see it. That's one of the reasons we light Shabbos candles. In the days when we didn't have electricity, if you were going to eat your Friday night meal in the dark, you would not enjoy it. And one of the commandments pertaining to the Sabbath is you have to enjoy it. It's called Oneg Shabbat, the enjoyment, the delight of the Sabbath. It's a biblical statement. You shall call the Sabbath a day of pleasure, a day of delight. So that's what the Midrash means. From this verse, it says, I afflicted you and I fed you the manna. From this we derive that you're supposed to light Shabbos candles, because this tells you that when you don't see the food, it's lacking in joy. Now, the lighting of Shabbos candles has other reasons besides the joy, because today we have electricity and we don't need the candles, but the candles enhance the joy. It's also used to honor the Shabbos, and it's also used to promote a spirit of peace and serenity in the house. In the olden days, when you didn't have electricity, people could trip and get into arguments. So by lighting the Shabbos candles, you bring in peace and serenity. Even now that we have electricity, it adds to the tranquility of the Shabbos. Then we have one of the most important commandments. I could say that about many commandments. But this is in chapter 8, verse 10. Where it says, "You shall eat, you will be satisfied, and bless God your God for the good land that he gave you." This is the source of what we call the grace after meals, or Birkat HaMazon. After eating, we're supposed to bless and thank God for the food. This mitzvah, this commandment, applies biblically when we eat bread, and rabbinically we're supposed to recite a blessing before and after eating any food. Before bread, we wash our hands, say a blessing over the washing of the hands. Then we make hamotzi, that's the blessing where God is praised for bringing forth bread from the earth. And after the meal is over, we say Birkat HaMazon, which consists of 4 blessings. The first blessing was composed or instituted because of the manna from heaven. The second blessing for the land of Israel that produces the food. The third blessing is for the city of Jerusalem, temple, and the kingdom, the monarchy of King David, which brought stability and prosperity to the land. The fourth blessing was composed after the destruction of the second temple and after the destruction of Beitar, when the Romans massacred the entire city and they did not allow the Jews to bury their dead for years. And as a result, 2 miracles happened. Number 1, the bodies did not decay. And number 2, we finally relented and allowed the bodies to be buried on the 15th of Av, which was last week. And it's considered to be a holiday because of that reason. So the fourth blessing is to thank God, even as we are in exile, and even in the time of suffering, He still watches over us and even gives us some miracles that sustain us. So those are the 4 blessings we recite after eating of bread. Okay, then Moses recounts how he went up to the mountain. This is in chapter 9. And he goes through how he was told by God to descend because they worshiped the golden calf. And he comes down in verse 15 with the 2 tablets, and he sees how the Jews sinned. And verse 17, and he grabs and seized the 2 tablets, and he threw them down, and he broke them. Now, I have a sense that most people who are familiar, and everyone who saw the movie, I assume, I didn't see the movie, but those who saw the movie saw Moses shattering the tablets. Well, that's my assumption. And I think most people have the impression that Moses did a terrible thing. Taking the holiest object that has ever existed, tablets that were made by God Himself, hewn by God and etched in the tablets by God, and He takes them and shatters them. Well, the truth is that Moses was praised for it. God tells him, "You did a good job." And in fact, the very last verse of the Torah, which praises Moses, the eulogy that God gives for Moses, it mentions that the great wonders and miracles he did in the presence of all of Israel. So Rashi says, he's referring to the tablets being shattered, that was Moses' greatest accomplishment in life, that he shattered the tablets. Why was that such a great accomplishment? Because that saved the Jewish people. Had the tablets been intact, that was like the marriage contract. That means the marriage would have been intact legally, and then what the Jews did would have represented adultery in terms of the relationship with God, and that would have brought about their destruction, their demise. So by shattering the tablets, Moses actually saved the Jewish people. But then why does it say, and I seized the tablets? Why did he have to seize it? He was holding it all the time. So the Rebbe explains that Moses had this tremendous love for the people. All of Moses' two loves. One was the Torah, one was the people of Israel. And here the Torah was represented by the tablets. That was the only text of Torah that we had then. And he takes it and destroys it. Now, and it's because of the Jewish people. That would impute guilt to the Jewish people, that they caused the tablets to be broken. Then God would be upset at them for another reason. Not only did they worship the golden calf, but they also caused the tablets to be shattered. So what Moses did, Moses says, you know what? These tablets are all mine. I'm taking full responsibility for it. It doesn't belong to the people. He seized it from the people, from their ownership, so he could take the full blame for the golden calf causing him to break the tablets. That's the reason why breaking of the tablets was considered to be such a great merit and praise for Moses, because it demonstrated that he was willing to sacrifice everything to save the Jewish people. And that's reinforced. You don't. And Moses obliterated, people would not have been spared. When he was up there, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, 40 days and 40 nights. Obviously, he was transformed into other than human entity, like an angel who doesn't need to eat or drink. But it's interesting that it doesn't say about sleep. So there's a story, there's a cute little story. There was a rabbi known as the Dubna Maggid. He was known for his parables and for his quips. He lived about 250 years ago. And once he was traveling, and he stayed in some Jewish person's home, having not eaten for a long time, he asked the person if he can serve him some food. This was at night after a long, weary day, several days of travel. And the man says, I'm sorry, I don't have any food. But I can give you a bed to sleep on. So he goes to the bed, but he couldn't fall asleep because he was so hungry. And then, after the host thought that he was in deep sleep, he invites his family members, takes out a gourmet meal from the refrigerator, or whatever it was that they kept the food in, and they had this really gourmet meal. And of course, the Dubna Maggid realized that the man was, of course, a miser. The next day, the Dubna Maggid was about to leave, so the man says, oh, you're a rabbi, before you leave, say some words of Torah. So he says, okay. It says that Moses was on the mountain, and he didn't eat, and he didn't drink. Why? Because it says when you go to a place, you follow its customs. In heaven, they don't eat or drink. So he didn't eat or drink either. So the question is, how did he know the angels didn't eat or drink? Maybe they were eating and drinking when he was asleep. Just like some people do. Well, the answer was that Moses was up. He didn't sleep either. That's how we know he didn't sleep. The fact that he didn't eat or drink means that he also didn't sleep. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known that the angels didn't eat or drink. So that was his way of getting back at this person. In chapter 10, verse 12, Moses says something startling. Now, O Israel, what does God your God ask of you? Only to fear God, your God. And the Talmud asks, is fear of God a minor thing? What does it mean? And now, God is only asking one thing. Although if you read a little on, he's asking a whole bunch of things after that. But we'll leave that for later. But even this part, the first thing he's saying, even if he says something minor, then he adds on to it gradually, we can understand that. But to start off with something so immense as fear of God. Fear doesn't mean trembling that God is going to strike you down with a bolt of lightning. Fear over here means a sense of awe of God's presence in your life, that you wouldn't do anything wrong because you feel God's presence. Is that a simple thing? That's a very, very high level. So the Talmud says, yeah, you're right. But for Moses, it's simple. So the question comes back again. But he's talking to the people, not to himself. So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya says that he's talking to everyone, because all of us have a spark of Moses in us. And all we have to do is awaken that spark, and then we have the ability to have this yira, to have this awe of God. There's a passage in the Talmud that says that the word for what is God asking of you could be, if you add an aleph to it, it becomes meya, 100. What is God is asking of you is 100. 100 what? So the Talmud explains that a Jew is required to say 100 blessings a day. If you count all the blessings we say in our prayers, a blessing means when we say Baruch Atah, blessed are you, God, or God, King of the universe, so on and so forth. And 100 blessings a day is the ideal way of living our daily routine. We cover most of it just by saying the 3 prayers a day, because the Shemona Esrei has 19. We do that 3 times a day. That's 57 already. Then we have the morning blessings, and then if you eat breakfast, lunch, and supper, you have another bunch, and go to the bathroom afterwards. You wash your hands, and there's another blessing. So we have ample blessings to make up that 100. But this is a deeper meaning of what God is asking. How do we awaken the yira, the awe of God? It's through the blessings that we say throughout the day. Chapter 11, verse 13 is a very familiar section. That is the second paragraph of the Shema. And many of the things in the second paragraph are similar to the first paragraph. Most notably is the commandment to love God, but there's a notable difference. If you look in the very first verse, 13, it will be that if you hearken to my commandments that I command you today, to love God your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. What's missing over here? And with all your might. In the first section of the Shema, the V'ahavta, it says, you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Here it just says levavchem, which is plural for your hearts, and nafshechem, with your souls. That's another difference. In the first section it's in the singular. In this section it's in the plural. So how do we account for the omission of with all your might? So the Hasidic interpretation is that the 2 sections of the Shema are dealing with 2 personality types. The first personality type is in a high spiritual level. This person can be asked to go beyond what people might consider to be their limits. This is the person who's called who does the will of God. Someone who really is committed to the point of God's exclusivity. The second section entertains the notion that the person is likely to not listen to God's commandments. And therefore, it doesn't use that extreme term, with all your might. A little bit less serious of an explanation, but it's a good one. The Talmud translates the word b'chol me'odecha in the first paragraph as with all your money. The 2 translations there. One is with all your measure, whichever way God measures, meets out to you, whatever it is, good or bad, you will still love him. That's one translation. The other one is literally it means with all your money. So how do we understand that? God says we should love him with all our heart, with passion, with all our soul, even give our lives for him, and then even give your money. What does that add? If you're ready to give your life, you're obviously ready to give your money. So the Talmud says something very funny, that there are some people for whom their money is more precious than their life. You know the story with the guy who was accosted by a thief with a gun, says, your money or your life? And the man pauses and he says, well, what's the answer? He says, I'm thinking.
Sounds like a trap guy.
Yes, it is. There are some people who care more about their money than their life. Now, it sounds like a real eccentric thing, but if you really think about how much are people willing to fight for their health and how much they're willing to fight for their wealth. There are many people who put days, nights, no life, they don't eat, they don't sleep right, they do everything just to make more money. They're killing themselves. So maybe they wouldn't, they would tell the thief, take my wallet, but and the slow death that they're submitting to shows that they care more about their wealth than about their health. So there is such a thing in society. But that's when God speaks to individuals. There are some eccentrics. But when in the second paragraph, where God is speaking to the entire community, we're in big trouble if everyone thinks that way. We could afford a few eccentrics who do things a little bit strange. And even they are told to love God not only with your life, but also with your money. But the group just has to be told to love God with all their heart and with all their soul. Near the end of this paragraph, in verse 21, after it talks about the mitzvah of tefillin, in verse 18, and then it talks about the mitzvah of mezuzah in verse 20, and in verse 21 it says, in order to prolong your days and the days of your children upon the land that God has sworn to your forefathers to give them, like the days of the heaven over the earth. So Rashi says that in this verse we can derive the resurrection of the dead. It's hinted in the Torah. Because it doesn't say the land that God will give give you, but give them. We're talking about those who already died. But God is saying your days will be lengthened on the land that God gave them, the people who are already gone. So this is a reference to the resurrection of the dead. But if we backtrack a little bit to verse 18, right before it introduces the mitzvah of tefillin, it says, you shall place these words of mine upon your heart and upon your soul. And then it says you should bind them upon a sock or a sign upon your arm and let them be an ornament between your eyes. So Rashi says, what does that mean that you shall place these words in your heart? So Rashi says, even after you go into exile, you should distinguish yourself with mitzvahs. You should put on tefillin and make mezuzahs. Why? So that the commandment shall not be new to you when you return. That means the mitzvahs we do now are practice, are a dry run for the mitzvahs that we will do when we come back in the Messianic age. Because right now, the mitzvahs that we do are not done with the same degree of perfection that we will do them when we are in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. We have the Holy Temple. So now, when we do the mitzvahs, we're preparing to do it for them. But there's a little better, deeper way of understanding that. If we wouldn't do mitzvahs today, and the Messianic age would come upon us, and then we would do everything, that would mean that the Messianic age came without our involvement. And that's contrary to the Jewish way of looking at Mashiach and redemption. In other cultures, they believe that a day will come that some godly entity will come and save them and take them into his embrace and make the world a perfect world, whatever it is that they believe. And all you have to do is have faith. Judaism is the antithesis of that. Yes, faith is important, that's the foundation. But if we don't do our part in creating it, it'll be a very embarrassing situation that God is showering all these blessings on us and teaching us all these great things, and we had nothing to do with it. By doing mitzvahs now, and the two specific mitzvahs he uses here are tefillin and mezuzah, that is our way of preparing that when the Mashiach comes and takes us into a state of redemption, the Messianic age, we will be familiar with the mitzvahs, we will just get a deeper understanding. It's like taking a kid who never went to elementary school or high school and thrusting him into an advanced college class. It'll overwhelm him. You have to go through a process. We are going through this process now, and every mitzvah we do prepares us for the Messianic age. This Shabbos, conclude on that note, is the 20th of Av, which is the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the father of the Rebbe. Levi Yitzchak Schneerson was the rabbi of the city in the Ukraine called Yekaterinoslav. Now it's the Dnepropetrovsk, and he was the chief rabbi of that city, defying the communist regime, following in the footsteps of his cousin, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Rebbe and the father-in-law of the Rebbe. So the two of them were the major forces in keeping Judaism alive in the Soviet Union. When the previous Rebbe was forced to leave after he was sentenced to death and it was commuted and they finally let him leave, who took over the work from 1927 onwards? That was the Rebbe's father until 1940, when he was incarcerated and exiled. And the 20th of Av is his yahrzeit. He passed away in 1944, and it's celebrated all over, observed, remembering the man's greatness. He was a phenomenal scholar. And a few letters that were sent that were published, in which incredible brilliance of Torah knowledge, especially in Kabbalah, which is the most esoteric and elusive level of learning. And in addition to all that, the man totally sacrificed his life and limb to keep Judaism alive. So that will be observed this Shabbos. Let everyone have a good evening and a good Shabbos.